Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with Kathleen. Today's edition is clearly the fall edition. I've gone commercial. Pumpkin spice. I can't resist it. I am that girl. I do love the flavors, and I do love pumpkin pie in general. So, but speaking of, getting into this fall season, I hope that I will see a bunch of you at Apex. Wanted to let you know that we are going to be there, me, Kristen, and Sheila. And of course, our sales team on the other side will be personing our booth once again, but we will be hanging out and ready to talk to partners and potential partners alike. So again, hope to run into you there. But, let's just jump in, as we always do, to the deep end about what we're talking about today. So, I've been thinking a lot of big thinks lately in Dr. Seuss style. But one of the things that, has particularly been on my mind is around confirmation bias. So I see a lot of things going on sort of both inside and outside of work related to this human tendency where we tend to not just receive information that confirms or supports our existing beliefs, but we actually have a tendency to sort of seek that out. And interestingly, it also, confirmation bias impacts us in the sense that it's how we interpret and recall information as well. Like, we're much more likely to recall information that supports our confirmation biases too. So it not just affects how we receive information, but also the information we seek out, and then the information that we remember later. And all of this gives us an overconfidence in our own personal beliefs. And so there is an English philosopher, Francis Bacon, and he described this tendency in 1620. He called it the great and pernicious predetermination. And it's been shown time and time again to be at the root of human error, particularly in fields like medicine, for example, where having this kind of bias can literally be lethal. Okay, so for most of us, we're probably not facing that kind of those kinds of stakes when we think about our own personal bias or our confirmation bias. But it does have a pretty big impact on the people we work with. And so as a business leader, for me, how does this show up? Well, my confirmation bias might support me thinking that a particular person is not, working very hard, or is not good at troubleshooting, or, does or doesn't do a whole variety of things. And then as I work with these people over time, anything that I accumulate about them tends to support that. And so in business, it's bad because it means that we're maybe not giving people a second chance, or maybe we're not allowing for the growth that occurs. I'll tell you, I'm a very different person than I was 11 years ago, for example. I pinged my old boss the other day because it was the anniversary of me leaving my last job, the 11-year anniversary of me leaving my last job a little while ago. And I pinged him. And I said, hey, I sent him a little photo of us on the last day. And I said, can you believe, 11 years ago, this and that. And we were going back and forth in conversation. And of course, his last significant experience with me is 11 years old. And it was an interesting opportunity for me to reflect on some of the things that are the same. I still have a lot of energy, for example, and I hope that never changes. I'm not trying to change that about myself. But there are a lot of other things that have changed, that I've grown. I've got better at certain things and probably not as good at others, because as we lean into one thing, other skills kind of fall by the wayside, for example. And so he has a particular point of view about who I am as a person that isn't entirely accurate anymore. I exist quite largely outside of his imagination at this point. And so in some ways, and I told him, I said, we should catch up so that I can reintroduce myself to this person who is so important to me. Right. And maybe reset those expectations. And knowing him as I do, he's the sort of person who is going to be very open and receptive to that. And his big advice to me always was to really stay curious and to stay open and to create space for people. I did receive a critique earlier on in my career that I don't allow people to evolve, that I made, decisions about them, who they are, how they were going to show up, how they were going to perform. And then I just sort of shut the door and moved on. And that's certainly a very quick way of moving your way through things in business, is to make those kind of snap decisions, to amass that information, and then to move on to accumulating other kinds of information. But in human-based systems, this just does not work very well. And it was one of my Achilles heel sort of aspects of my leadership years ago. And I've really worked to make that not the case. Not going to say I'm perfect, because I'm not perfect in anything. But it is a practice that I lean into at this point. So how can we put people on performance improvement plans, or how can we set up conditions under which they're supposed to improve if we're not actually giving them the space to improve, where everything they do, we're just using that to accumulate, to moving them out the door. And certainly if we're moving out the door, people out the door, and that's the goal, then certainly that's part of that process. But where we're really setting people up and saying, hey, I want to create a situation in which you can thrive. I am very committed to you, and the way that we are committed to all of our team members, we should be creating conditions where they can do that improvement. So there was there's game theory studies, and I'm really interested in that, because I think game theory applies to work a lot of times, where we're playing for similar kinds of stakes as we would be playing in certain games, right? And so it's been found that the strategy of tit for tat really does well in repeated play. So if you begin with a cooperative move, and then someone else reciprocates with a cooperative move, and you go back and forth in this way, you will be much better off in a game. But then what happens is that oftentimes your opponent or you will decide, in a particular moment of whimsy or something else, that you're going to do one act of what's called defection, meaning you're going to stray away from that cooperative principle, and instead you're going to do something that's more antagonistic or aggressive. And when you do that, if you immediately, let's say it's your opponent that does that, and you immediately respond with your own antagonistic move, then now you are in a destructive cycle of mutual defection, and ultimately you both are going to lose. When a person makes one of those moves, if you ignore one defection, or perhaps even two, and you grant a second or even a third chance, your chances of success in the game are vastly improved. Why? Because when you respond to an act of defection with an act of trust, what you create in the other person is a sense that you can be deeply, deeply trusted. Think about that for a second. You're in an engagement or in a relationship where there's a certain amount of trust because you've both been behaving in cooperative ways. Then suddenly the other person makes a mistake or does something that damages maybe your trust in them a little bit. And rather than responding in a tit for tat way, you continue to respond cooperatively. The trust that that person has in you is magnified. That has just really deepened your ability to create trust in that other person, and therefore gives them room to not just respond cooperatively, but sometimes to magnify their cooperation that comes back. And, look, we're presented with these opportunities probably as business leaders, or as people who work well cross-functionally, or effectively cross-functionally, or even outside of our company with others. We're presented with these opportunities so often. And so how do you do this without really setting yourself up to get burned, right? Like, so that whole theory, like when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And so I think we can take that to its logical conclusion, which is to say, when someone shows you who they are, believe them, yes, and evaluate them on the totality of what they've showed you. So if someone has showed you 8 great things and 2 not so great things, don't over-index on the negative, because there's 8 proof points that say something good and 2 proof points that say something not so good, right? And we have a tendency to over-index on the negative as human beings as well, right? That's how we're wired. And so if we're really not considering the totality of all of that, sometimes hyper-focusing on what's wrong instead of focusing on what's wrong and what's right, leads us into this kind of negative cycle. And then the confirmation bias evidence that we're plucking out and that we're reviewing regarding that person is just the negative stuff. Most people don't go into work to do a bad job. And so when you understand that most people want to succeed, at least at some level, most people are committed, at least at some level, and want to do a good job, we can create conditions for success by allowing things to be what they are, by every day being sort of a fresh day. And so I was just having a conversation with a colleague about this, and somebody at work who used to make a particular kind of mistake really super, super often, was worked on it, really worked to not make those mistakes anymore, and hasn't made this particular kind of mistake for the last couple of years. But then suddenly the other day made that mistake. And so my colleague was immediately like, oh, there goes that person making that mistake again. Oh, here we go again, blah, blah, blah. And all it did was put that little piece of evidence in the bucket of stuff that we're already carrying around about that person. And then I said, yeah, okay, so they made this mistake again, and they should be coached about this mistake. Like, hey, this is kind of back to this pattern that we worked on before. We don't love this mistake. And having said that, it's been a couple of years. We've worked with this person a long time. It's been a couple of years since they made this mistake. So obviously there are a lot of decisions that have happened over the last couple of years that were not this one, that were probably good ones, and we didn't learn about them because they didn't escalate and we didn't have any problems for quite some time. And so we need to acknowledge the totality of the behavior, which is that this issue has been largely corrected, but now we see an instance of it again. We still need to talk about it, but we don't need to over-index on it, right? And that's what is known as radical commitment to people, where we believe that people are talented. We believe that people have something to offer. We believe that overall their contribution can and will be positive. And so we are looking for those positive things to occur so we can magnify them, while still acknowledging, correcting, and attempting to encompass any negative or erroneous, or whatever the word is that you want to use, things that people are doing. Because sometimes people just do things that frankly are annoying to us, but actually don't really have that big of an impact on the business. And those are things that we can toss to the side entirely. We don't need to deal with every single thing someone does and try to correct every single thing, particularly if those things don't have a big impact on our business. Like, who cares, right? So, I really have been thinking a lot about this, because this is sort of the problem with us socially now, is that every time something happens, we have a tendency to throw it in the bucket of, there goes those people again, the othering of people, the not seeing how maybe our societal conditions or work conditions or cultures or environments are producing a certain kind of result either. And I think process solves a lot of problems. So where I see somebody repetitively failing, I think, yeah, let's deal with the individual. But then let's also look at the system in which that individual is operating and say, is there anything that we can do to improve the process that this person is working in, such that it helps to reduce these kinds of errors, or these kinds of problems in the future? How can we provide training? How can we provide resources? How can we change the process? How can we automate certain pieces of this? How can we surround this person with better support, such that, we're kind of guiding or steering in a different direction? And sometimes, yes, somebody's behaviors are extremely negative or extremely non-productive or whatever, and ultimately we have to exit them. And we should do that again, encompassing all of the performance and all of the behavior. And we don't take that decision lightly ever. I know that. And sometimes it's the outcome. We have to operate in an environment of both compassion and accountability, because those things together create the kind of clarity that we want to demonstrate in our businesses, and they create the kind of performance culture that we want. But they do that including the individual, not leaving the individual to the side. And that is why so many of the folks working on my team, I believe, are really high performing. And I tell this to people all the time. I say, I have a super high performing team. And I say that, and, people come and go, and we hire new people and we fit them into the system. And by and large, people perform. That's not to say that at any given point in time, maybe a team member is struggling. There's something going on in their lives and they're not doing as well right now. Or we've brought in a new person and they're kind of struggling to find their footing or whatever. So again, I believe that the first thing to look at is the process, the way something is set up. Just because it worked before doesn't mean it's going to continue to work. Has our business evolved? Do we need to change how we do this particular thing? Do we need to divide up these tasks and redistribute them among people so that we're successful again? And as leaders, sometimes we get frustrated with that because we're like, I already solved that problem. I'm bored of that problem. I don't want to revisit this process. I built this process out already. Everybody should just be doing it, and we should just be successful the way we were last year or the year before. And I shouldn't have to keep revisiting the same things because I want to go on and be interested and work on more interesting problems. But you know what? That's the gig. That's what you signed up for. And if you're not taking the time to revisit your old or previously worked on business cycles periodically, then you're probably not taking advantage of the latest thinking, the latest technologies, the input that people have, the opportunities to improve that exist around your existing processes, while at the same time thinking about new business problems and moving those along. The more stable your base is over time, the more you can grow, the more the people on your team can grow, and the more you can evolve. And again, sometimes the job outgrows the people or vice versa. And that does definitely happen, but only by addressing that in an environment where we allow people to grow and develop, will we really be able to see those things. So I'm going to give you a quote. I love to do this. And I've been reading a lot. Actually, I'm going to show you. So I went to Amsterdam with my son in June, and I picked up these books at the Van Gogh Museum. And one of them is called Advice for the Soul. And what I didn't realize about Vincent van Gogh is that he and his brother Theo had this ongoing letter correspondence with each other. And I really love this. First of all, I love reading people's private journals or notes, or particularly creative people, and I kind of collect those. And I love reading people's letters back and forth to each other. And what I didn't realize about Vincent van Gogh, again, confirmation bias, right, is that he was actually not just a very talented painter and a super creative person, and someone who made beautiful things. We think about him, we think about the madness that we all know about, some of the salacious details of his life and, his eventual death, sort of confirmed for us that, maybe he was a mentally ill person, and that's how we characterize him. But actually, he was also an incredibly wise, sensitive, thoughtful person who had a lot to share with the world, not just in terms of his legacy of his art that's hanging in the museums, but the words that he exchanged with his brother and with others with whom he was in correspondence. And some of the other things that he left behind are also part of his legacy. And I've had a lot of fun, digging into some of those things. So in a letter that he wrote to his brother during a period of time where he wasn't feeling very good, he said, "All your kindnesses for me, I have found them greater than ever today. I can't tell you as I feel it, but I assure you that kindness has been of great worth. And if you don't see its results, my dear brother, don't be upset about it. You will still have your kindness." Again, that's a letter that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo. And I think about the way that we lead in the same way. So even if we're exhibiting great leadership And not everybody that we're working with responds. They don't exhibit the growth we're looking for. They don't exhibit the behaviors that we're looking for. What are we left with? Like, oh, this didn't work. Why am I even doing this? Why bother? What's going on? Who cares? I tried, right? What we are left with is that we are leaders and we are acting as leaders. We are left with our leadership. We are left with our compassion. We are left with the spaciousness that we created for other people to grow. That's what we're left with. We're left with being that person where every day is a fresh day. Every doorway we walk through, literal and metaphorical, is an opportunity. And the same is true for everyone else that we interact with. We have to believe that just as we're growing and we're committed to it, and we have insights at times that change how we think and operate. And my gosh, we're not the same person we were a decade ago. And we look back at some of the things we did or said as kids or early on in our career, or whatever, and we go, oh, I can't believe I did that. We do that with ourselves. We can see that in ourselves. So why is that not possible for others? Of course it's possible. And that's the opportunity of each new day, is just with wide open eyes and wide open hearts, we observe what's happening. And if what's happening isn't great, or if what's happening doesn't work for our business or whatever, then we do what we need to do, because the culture of our business and the cohesiveness of our teams are important. But part of that is also just creating that space, that foundation, those processes, and really thinking through how can we create conditions where there's the greatest chance for someone to thrive in this environment. And when we do that, the other person also has to come to the table and give their best, or at least their 80%, right? So that they can grow as well, and they can come up to the level that we're expecting, and they can perform. But it's up to us to help create those conditions. So one more little reading for you here. It's a poem by Robert Bly, and it's called Things to Think. Think in ways you've never thought before. If the phone rings, think of it as carrying a message larger than anything you've ever heard, vaster than 100 lines of Yeats. Think that someone may bring a bear to your door, maybe wounded and deranged. Or think that a moose has risen out of the lake and he's carrying on his antlers a child of your own whom you've never seen. When someone knocks on the door, think that he's about to give you something large, tell you that you're forgiven, or that it's not necessary to work all the time, or that it's been decided that if you lie down, no one will die. Just a poetic little reminder that anything is possible, and particularly for us as human beings, we've been given the sacred trust and the sacred responsibility of having so much impact on each other and on our world. And we can just do a little better without the pesky confirmation bias getting in the way. That's our opportunity. Let's do it. Cheers.